The Bog Man is after me, a ghost story from the north of England. I grew up during the 1970s in the small country town of Wilmslow. It's located just south of the Roman city of Chester, nestled in the Cheshire Plain with the Welsh foothills off in the distance. It was an idyllic place with a powerful sense of its history. Even as a kid, I knew that grown-ups had been walking down those narrow country lanes for centuries, and that their kids had run off into the fields in search of those secret places where they could let their imaginations run free. I was the middle of three kids who were also the best of friends, and one of our favorite pastimes was to visit the moor at the edge of town. The moor was a wide open peat bog with lots of places to play. The chattering birds and buzzing bees provided a gentle soundtrack, and we would run through the heather and the long grass, surprising the occasional fox or badger with our raucous laughter. The highlight was a small railway track built for transporting the peat dug up by the workers. We spent countless happy hours on the peat bog, pushing carriages up and down the tracks in various games. But the mood would always change as the light left the sky. The birds ran out of their song, and the moor became a lifeless, eerie place. Was there something hiding in the growing shadows, watching and waiting to make its evil move on us? You'd have to be crazy to hang around and find out, so we made sure to be long gone well before dusk settled in. The entrance to the peat bog was known as Stormy Point, and from there a long narrow path cut right through the middle of the peat bog. The path was lined on both sides by tall tangled trees that blocked the open expanse of the peat bog from view. I'd become a passionate runner as a teenager and loved to connect my various running routes into long, complicated networks, and many of my favourite networks featured that path through the peat bog. It was strictly a daytime run, however, because the peat bog had no lights to guide me, and that was fine with me. My childhood desire to be well away from the peat bog by dusk was still very strong. One evening in 1981, in April, I was out for a run. The clocks had just changed, and this gave me an extra hour of daylight to play with. It had been a beautiful blue sky day, but somehow I'd managed to miscalculate the time. When I reached the edge of the peat bog, the light was starting to fade. I could already see the silver moon hanging in the sky, and the mist was slowly creeping its way along the ground. I thought about turning around, but I'd been running well and didn't want to give up on what was going to be a fast time. So I decided to cross the peat bog anyway, and I set off down the path. I first glanced back about 1 minute into the peat bog, just as the last rays of light filtered through the trees. The path was clear, but I thought I sensed something move in the distance. On my next glance back, I could see that someone was running behind me. It was unusual to see another runner on the peat bog, but not impossible. There was something odd, though. Even from far away, I could see that they were strangely thin and wiry, and they swayed awkwardly from side to side, as if being knocked by an invisible force. Even so, they were faster than me. From then on, my panic grew with each backward glance, and then what happened next really freaked me out. Whatever it was that was chasing me went down on all fours and sped up. Deep inside, I knew that it was after me, and it was closing in fast. My heart was pounding, and that's when the last light faded away. I was in the dark, and all I could hear was my breathing and my feet pounding the ground. Here I was in the middle of the moor, and even the silver moon had left me alone to be drowning in this black nightmare. I was bouncing off the trees, stumbling forward in a panic. Where was this monster? Was it still behind me? Perhaps it was now ahead, listening to my feet carrying me towards its trap. There was no safe way back or forward. There was no escape from this thing. It would find me. The streetlights greeted me like old friends at the far edge of the peat bog. Their orange glow guided me along Racecourse Road, a road that skirted around the bog and would carry me home to the warmth and safety of my home. I could feel my whole body relaxing with each stride. Although my frantic dash was just still moments earlier, it already seemed like madness. How could I let the play of light through the trees panic me so much? I was 16 and should know all about optical illusions by now. By the time I turned up my home road, I had resolved not to mention anything of my panic to anyone. My running log simply mentioned how impressively fast I'd run across the rough terrain in the pitch black. The summer of 1984 brought a heat wave. Returning home from Nottingham University, I enjoyed evening walks with my mum and dad across the peat bog and a nearby ridge called Aldley Edge. I had many conversations with my dad, fueled by his fascination with archaeology. He told me about the wizard of Aldley Edge. According to local legend, the wizard presided over King Arthur's knights who lay sleeping underground, awaiting a time when they would be woken to defend England against some mighty foe. I'd gaze across the Cheshire Plain on our walks across the edge and see the glow of the evening sun on the moor's heather. I proposed that the knights were buried on the peat bog, and that one glorious day in the future, this would be confirmed when the peat diggers unearthed Excalibur, King Arthur's sword. My dad disagreed, favouring a burial site in Cornwall, but we did agree that the peat bog was an ancient place that held many deep mysteries. Soon after returning to university that autumn, I found home for what I expected would be a routine check-in. But my dad answered and was very excited. He had breaking news about the peat bog and its mysteries. 1 month earlier, a body had been dug up on the peat bog and it had made the national news. I made the expected joke about finding one of King Arthur's knights with Excalibur by his side, but that was the last of my joking. That phone call started a series of revelations, and each one brought more butterflies to my stomach. My dad took me to the excavation site on the next visit home. It was right next to the section of the path where the ghost-like runner had first appeared 3 years earlier. That fact was surprising itself, but the real shock was triggered by the body's appearance. When my dad later showed me a photo, its shriveled body looked exactly like the wiry physique of the runner. The newspapers called him Pete Marsh, and Pete turned out to be one of the oldest preserved bodies ever found on the peat bog. Possibly dating from the Iron Age or Roman times, he was truly ancient, more than 1,000 years older than King Arthur. Pete had been a druid prince who had been killed during a violent ritual. He'd been stabbed in the chest, hit on the head with a blunt axe, and then garroted. It wasn't clear whether he was still alive when he received all of these injuries, but there was speculation that he might have been alive for several hours during the ordeal. In my mind, I pictured Pete being pushed around by a violent crowd, eventually falling to the ground and clambering on all fours, desperately trying to outrun his fate. In 2008, I visited the British Museum in London and finally came face to face with Pete. He lay curled up, imprisoned within a glass box, and yet he looked exactly like the apparition I had run from. Taking a close look at his features, I reflected on the principle of Occam's razor, that the most likely explanation for a mystery is the one with the least assumptions. In the fading evening light, those tall dark trees lining the path could easily have looked like a wiry runner to a frightened teenager. To stamp out any residue of speculation, I resolved to take a nighttime walk down that dark path the next time I was home. Nothing would happen, showing that nothing was there. The next time I was home, I followed through with my plan. I first visited my favourite country pub for refreshment and some much-needed courage. The plough and flail lay on the edge of the peat bog, and so it was just a short stroll to the scene of my nightmare. When I got there, I stared down the path into the inky blackness and then turned away. The adult in me argued that I didn't want to get my shoes muddy, but the kid in me knew that you should keep well away from the peat bog after the sun has gone down. The Bog Man is After Me is a true ghost story dedicated to my dad, Bob Taylor. We took many happy walks across the peat bog, in the daylight, of course. Thank you for listening.